All right, everybody, welcome back. We are doing Valedor today, which I'm on the fence. I kind of regret it, and then I kind of don't. Also, this book came out in 2014. I thought it was more recent than that, but added to the pile of books that at least it didn't come out in like 20 or 2002. You know, like I'm getting better. So, Valedor. I have one question to ask before basically getting into the book. Is the book still good if you need to read it multiple times in order for it to get better? Or should it be good from the start and then subsequent readings just get even better? So, because that's where I'm at. At this point, I've read this book 5 times because there's just a lot in it that I wanted to kind of make sure and clarify and figure out and stuff like that, because I know it was written in like 2014, so a lot of the lore is probably different now, especially with the Yanari, but I still, there is a lot. And there's also a ton of characters. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's do the review first. And out of spite, I am adding a character thing. I'm not doing necessarily like a character analysis like I usually do, but I will explain like their roles in the story, because I feel like that would be helpful if you do want to read the book to get like an understanding of how many characters there are. And this is just going to be like semi-important characters, not even like all of them. Okay, so what is Valedor actually about? Firstly, Valedor is kind of a misnomer. It's actually the imperial name for an Eldar maiden world called Duriel. And for those that don't know, a maiden world is a planet that was altered in about every aspect that you can think of in order to make it suitable for for future Eldar settlement. But the Eldar actually, now they live on craft worlds. So what are maiden worlds still doing around? They're just that old. They've been around since the fall of the Eldar's like ancient empire, but they still kind of lay claim to them and see themselves as like stewards of these worlds. And they guard them very zealously because they can't exactly make any more of these worlds, but they also don't have like the standing forces to occupy them permanently. And also the craft worlders don't want, for their own reasons, to settle these worlds yet, because to be on the path is to be devoid of blah, 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 blah. It's very Eldar. Duriel at this point has now kind of already been semi-destroyed, and it's now settled by humanity currently. And then we find out later that there is a prophecy by Uriel. This is the only kind of reason that they intervene. Otherwise, it's more like out of principle if they do show up, because it's already been thrice despoiled, in their words. Tex Silverari, Farseer of Eandon, gets a prophecy about how if two hive fleets merge at Duriel, something bad will happen. I would elaborate on what bad would happen, but honestly, the book isn't that clear, and that's part of kind of the main premise is a bit broken. But before I get into that, the two hive fleets or splinter fleets, because they're not like the full hive fleets. The two splinter fleets are Kraken and Leviathan. Since this book isn't from the actual human perspective, they aren't known in the book as Kraken and Leviathan. They're actually referred to as far-ranging hunger and starving dragon. So you can add that to the lexicon of names for the Tyranids, since the Tau call them the Yahi and the Orcs call them Debugs. I don't know if the Leagues of Votann have a different name for them, and I'm pretty sure the Necrons have a name for them, but I don't want to look it up. So here's where things get like fuzzy. The hive fleets are descending in tandem on Duriel, and during the consuming of the planets, like both Kraken and Leviathan are supposed to merge, as one does when you meet, in space. The remaining forces of Kraken, the excerpt from the book is basically the remaining forces of Kraken are soon to meet with a newly arrived splinter fleet of Hive Fleet Leviathan and should they be allowed to join, information on countless races within the galaxy will be known, but the Tyranid codexes have shown that the hive mind does not need the various fleets to meet, like, physically, to actually exchange this information, as that would mean that there's only, like, there isn't only one hive mind. There'd be many unique to their various fleets. So when Hive Fleet Gorgon was destroyed by the Tau, it's mentioned that it's pointless because the hive mind retained all the information gained from the fleet. Considering the losses the Eldar already suffered, it doesn't make sense to have them, like, take on the Tyranids themselves, outside of basically just, like, standing on principle and, like, going out and doing this. I say, because this was published in 2014, that the author was kind of working on a older understanding of how Tyranids work, and they might have actually been trying to go in that direction before, pulling out and kind of going in a different direction. And that's just the consequence of the setting being constantly updated and, like, kind of rejigged as things get added in. So nowadays, the way it usually works is when two splinter fleets meet, they don't necessarily merge. Like, it's not guaranteed. So when they find each other, they'll either completely ignore each other or they'll fight until one decimates the other and then gets, like, absorbed into the winning fleet, because that's, like, when you win in the Tyranid's eyes, you're the superior genetics, and then they'll absorb the not superior genetics, and then they'll continue as a bigger fleet that's now under not a new name, but, like, the old name. So yeah, if that makes sense, then we've cleared things up. Anyway, as far as this book is concerned, something about this merging is different, and the book, a gripe basically, that if you ever look at a review, this is, like, the first thing they mention. The premise itself, it's kind of broken. The book doesn't do a good job of laying out why this merging of all the different mergings is, like, different. So all that's clear is that the skein shows that if these two splinter fleets merge, the resulting fleet that comes after will bring a scale of destruction that has the Eldar basically feeling like they need to get involved. There's a couple of quotations actually in the book that mention superorganisms that would bring doom to the galaxy, but to be honest, that raises the stakes, like, to the stratosphere, and two splinter fleets, we've seen the merging before. Nothing, like, heinous has happened to the entire galaxy. Like, as bad as the Tyranids are, I just don't see the entire galaxy, like, submerging because of two splinter fleets merging. But yeah, my suggestion is just to not think too hard about it. Just go with this. Like, Craft World Iyanden is basically still recovering from being ravaged by Chaos forces and a couple of cyclonic torpedoes, as well as their own Tyranid attack. They have to muster a force of about 2/3 of its remaining war host to respond to a prophetic vision, which is this prophecy is confirmed by a council of seers to the planet of Duriel to stop this convergence. So they muster out, but Iyanden knows that it doesn't have the forces to contend with the raw power of two fleets of Tyranids, so they send a message to nearby Bieltan, and basically, like, the instant Bieltan gets this message, they send out a war host, like their own fleet, a bit, essentially, and it's led by Autarch Sunspear to Duriel. However, big problem, there's a mix-up, and the Iyandi arrive late to the party after Sunspear has already engaged the Tyranids, because, in his words, they're the superior species, and they could totally take on two hive fleets by themselves. They convene, like, a special council in the aftermath of that, like, rout, essentially, and both Craft World forces understand that they can't do this still, but luckily for them, they actually end up receiving aid via the Harlequins and the Dark Eldar. And speaking of the Dark Eldar, they are easily, like, the best part of this book, because they kind of break up the formality of the Craft Worlds as they engage with each other, because up till then, it's just a lot of meetings and or conversations about regret, and then more meetings, and then maybe some fighting, but more like talk about fighting. Once the Dark Eldar show up, it definitely kind of throws a wrench in the formula that is the craft worlds talking to each other. There is a pretty glaring issue here, though, and that is with like the massive cast. I'll get to that with the character analysis portion, where I just list off all the characters, and you'll understand. You'll see there are dummy large amounts of characters. I'm not the only review that you'll see bring this up, but it's one of those things that really does get in the way of the story because it just keeps shifting POVs. I mean, it's super nice generally when a story has like completely different POVs because you can see the same story from different like perspectives, and you get like a better understanding of how this like narrative is playing out usually. But in this story's case, it's just there's too many. Like there is just too many. It also doesn't help that each of the characters usually have like a couple of names as well as like a title to go along with like their normal name. It took a few reads like in a row to kind of nail down who exactly was who. And this book's like old enough that when you try and research about it, there isn't really a full story like breakdown and character thing and like stuff to confirm what you know from the book. So a lot of the information you get from the book, you really have to just kind of memorize and take away yourself without actually being able to rely on like other sources. This is basically the place, like the book itself. Because like it's odd if you go online and you try and research kind of like the fallout of Valedor, because like this is an old book, so I wanted to know like, hey, where did all these plot threads go? There isn't that much information at all, and a lot of the names are actually like misspelled, or like the stories even in the book are like not told correctly, and I'm just like, did you guys read the book? Like I'm confused. So yeah, I'm at this point just kind of going strictly off the book with like no other sources to support, which feels really odd, but here we are. So in defense of this book, I want to say that it has to do, like the large cast, I should say, that it has to do with how little books get published for Xenos, but also for Eldar specifically. That limited window basically makes it necessary to shove like an unholy amount of characters and plot threads into a single book. Unlike Space Marine books or anything like Dan Abnett related, there won't be another chance to put out another book for like a good half decade, which means you have to like throw in as many characters that are related and plot threads and like stuff that are going on with Eldar in one book, regardless of if it actually matters to the broader narrative, because it's just like the only chance you're going to be able to do that in like an actual novel form instead of just throwing it into a codex. But anyways, back to the story. So now that there's Dark Eldar and Harlequins, as well as bolstered by Wraith soldiers, along with like the full forces of Craft Worlds, Eandon, and Bilton, like everybody's actually at the planet now instead of like on their way. They come up with a new plan, which is to destroy the planet of Duriel while the Tyranids of both splinter fleets are in the final stages of feeding on the planet. And they're planning to use something called the Heart of Fire. I'm not entirely sure what it's. I think it's literally detonating the planet, which is crazy, but Dark Eldar technology is also crazy. So there you go. That's also like the plan that they come up with takes the better part of basically the last like half of the book to actually accomplish. And one more gripe, and then I'll actually get to the point where I'm like, these parts of the book are actually good. Because to be clear, I actually really did, like by my third or fourth read, start and like not start, but genuinely enjoy this book. It just took. That's why I asked the question in the beginning, like, is a book still good if you have to read it over and over again to get it to get good? If it's still good, because I don't know if I just have like Stockholm syndrome at this point or what, but like at this point I actually do like this book. It just took a while for me to be like, all right, now that I know what's going on, I do like this book. But my knee-jerk reaction to the first read was it was confusing and I didn't really like it that much, way too many characters, and that the plot didn't really matter because two splinter fleets merging is not the end of the galaxy. So I don't know why it's an apocalypse novel. Like, this doesn't feel very normal. But then I kind of, like I said, I just started to be like, okay, well, this was published a while ago. Maybe the author was just kind of going in a different direction. And also, like, the Eldar don't usually get that many books. So the representation here has to be much more dense than usual. And also, once you kind of get a hold of all the different names and the characters, and you kind of take a step back, this book does get a lot better once you kind of understand basically what's happening. Yeah, the one more gripe is it's an apocalypse novel, but it never feels like anyone's fighting, like anything, ever. Even when there is, like, literally fighting going on in the seating. And I don't really know how else to describe it other than I have a meta, like, way, which is, like, out of universe. I'm going to use Godzilla. But the in-universe, for those of you that, like, read the Great Crusade novels, like in the Horus Heresy, it's kind of like in the early days when they're doing a compliance and all the Space Marines are talking internal politics while blasting PDF and, like, other defensive, like, stuff within the planet. Like, they have deployed their full-on assault mode, but they're just talking, like, you know, upper crust British people about, like, internal crusade politics. And it's just like, are you fighting, or is this like a meeting? I mean, apparently the authors actually did that on purpose because, like, they wanted it to feel like the Space Marines were so, like, so well equipped and so well trained and so above the fighting skill of who they were deploying against that they could talk about basically everything else but the actual conflict, to make it seem like this was basically a breeze for them, just like they were clocking in for their 9 to 5. But in the meta way, it's kind of like the old Godzilla movies where, like, in one scene an entire city would get, like, obliterated, and then in the next scene it would just be like a meeting filled with a bunch of old people talking about, like, policy and plans. It's kind of like that. So I don't know, maybe people don't watch Godzilla movies from, like, the 50s, but that's how it feels sometimes. Not that there's too many meetings in this book, it's just there is a boatload of dialogue. Like, the Eldar will talk all the time, regardless of what's happening to them or around them. They'll just keep talking. So I don't know, it's an odd, like, juxtaposition that does feel very Eldar, but it also kind of diminishes the very real Tyranid threat. Like, there's a chapter where there's a team of Eldar that are fighting a lictor, and they're still just talking the entire time. And then someone gets killed, and they're still talking. And I'm like, bro, what are you doing? Why are you talking so much? Like, is it just because they're so long-lived that they're just like, I don't know, man, this is just another day. Like, even when it isn't another real day, like, it does feel Eldar, but at the same time, it's different. Maybe I need to get used to it, or maybe it's just, this is yet another reason why people kind of are turned off by the Eldar. As far as the book goes, though, I'd confidently say that this is, like, a terrific Eldar book, if that makes sense. It's like saying, it's like coming out of a superhero movie being like, man, for a superhero movie, this is really good. You know, like, I don't want to cross genre compare, because I would argue that Eldar stuff is, like, almost in a different setting completely than, like, normal Warhammer. Like, when you read specifically from their POV, because generally you'll get Eldar, but as, like, almost second fiddle to a main character story, because you see one in the, like, Black Legion books and the, like, Talon of Horus, and then you'll see one in the Night Lord's Omnibus. You'll have Harlequins in the Fabius Bile trilogy. You'll get Ilia Natase in the Dawn of Fire books and in the Dark Imperium books. So, like, most of the time you don't get Eldar through and through, you know? When you buy the cake that is a 40K novel, it's not, like, all Eldar flavored. It's literally just, you know, Eldar gumdrops. And that's I kind of get why they do that now, because, like, all Eldar is just, like, It's a lot, man. It's a lot. I wouldn't say it's so far as like it's so bad. It just definitely takes a little bit of getting used to. So I don't recommend this book to anyone who isn't like curious or like adamantly an Eldar fan. And even then, it might get on your nerves because this book has some things that are wrong with it. So if you're somebody that doesn't win, like, because there's the spirit of the lore where when you read it, you're like, ah, yes, this feels like Warhammer. And then there's the like actual legalese, the granular, and like the true to the lore, as in he's wearing the right armor, he's shooting the right bolter, and he's on a planet that we know, and he's fighting enemies that actually make sense. Like it's all of that. It's the gotcha fans that are like, oh, might have been a good story, but he was using the wrong stalker pattern bolter. That didn't come out for another 2,000 years. It's like, bro, okay, look, I'm not. I am somebody that will call something like that out if the story is bad. But if the story is good, my guy, this guy can backflip a Terminator suit, and I wouldn't care. Okay, chaplains could be showing face and fighting in their robes if they wanted to. I don't care. The spirit of the lore matters more to me than the actual lasguns have to behave like lasguns experience. That being said, I will say it's a great shame that like the Yanari plot line hasn't or won't be proceeding in the future, because having the Eldar god of the dead come back and giving his race like a second wind as well as some relevance in the setting would only make the grimdark future of the 40th millennium that much more compelling. And the same can be said, I stand on this hill, about like the Leagues of Votann, the Dark Eldar, or the Dark Mechanicum, also the Dark Eldar. Definitely. They do get representation though. Shout out to the Big Daka. They're awesome in that. Vashtor, if he got expanded on, the Necrons. Basically, the more you kind of buff up and put meat on the bones of like the other races outside of humanity, the richer the setting gets. So I'm all for all the other books getting published outside of humanity, because I think humanity gets way too much of a perspective. I get that GW and the authors basically they put out what gets bought. The reason we don't see a lot of the other books is because they just straight up just don't get bought, right? It's not for any other reason. Like GW and Black Library like profit. So if it was profitable, they would put out other books, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So if you want to see Eldar books, buy them. Because I promise you, they'll keep publishing them if you buy them. It's commercial fiction. That's kind of how that works. So it sucks, but that is the world we live in. To wrap up, I'll say that if you want more of like a thorough look at Eldar behind the scenes, as well as just like a well-crafted story with Tyranids being fought in like a straight-up brawl, then this is like a good book to look into. But be prepared for a lot of characters, which I'm getting into right after this. A very slow start, but also like an explosive ending with a lot of setup and lots of lore. So you get tons of like Aeneid. The Eldar's like god of death. Here you go. You get a lot of lore on that. You get to see perspective from Wraith, like Wraith Knights, but also like Wraith soldiers, and like there's a lot of dead Eldar in this that can still kind of give their perspective and talk and do the thing, because Ayana is a Wraith seer, and a lot of the stuff that's attached to her is a bunch of dead Eldar, and they talk and they do the thing. So yeah. Speaking of characters though, and I didn't write this one down, but there's a Avatar of Cain, which is stellar. The Avatar of Cain is awesome. Any scene with the Avatar of Cain is just like, hell yeah. It's like when I see Titans in regular Imperial stories, I'm like, yes, let's go. But yeah, anyways, so the characters that are in this, and I'm not going to do a full breakdown because I don't know enough about lore, about Eldar, to actually confidently be like, yes, this is what an autarch is. I don't actually know. This is genuinely the first story. I've never read a codex, and this is like the first full-on novel of Eldar. Because I've read like short stories with Eldar, but not long form. and I don't know enough about their lore to actually be able to like do full-on breakdowns. But anyways, Teak Silvereye, he's the Farseer of Eandon, and he's pretty much who you'll start the story off with properly. He gets the prophecy. He brings together the Council of Seers, and he also sends the message to Bealtan, being like, hey, we need to go to Duriel, otherwise known as Valedor, and we need to like deal with these two hive fleets before they merge. Kelmon, he's a Wraith Seer, and he does a good job of bringing insight into what it means to be dead, like as an Eldar. Iana, she's a Spirit Seer. She routinely brings back Eldar spirits that are supposed to be dead from the Infinity Circuit, and she also believes in the whole prophecy surrounding the God of the Dead coming back and, you know, subduing, diminishing, and or killing Slaanesh and like releasing a bunch of spirits. Which, fun fact, apparently everything that's in Slaanesh, or at least according to this book, everything that's in Slaanesh isn't actually dead. So the whole pantheon that Slaanesh, because I know Isha is still alive. She's just like in Nurgle's garden, and then Kegarak is just chilling like in the webway, hanging out and controlling the Harlequins. But the rest of them are actually inside of Slaanesh, and they're still alive. So if, as well as all the other Eldar souls that have been like absorbed into Slaanesh. So as long as Slaanesh can get killed or, you know, diminished or subdued or whatever, those souls can actually come out, and that's what the God of Death is supposed to do. And the reason it's so controversial is because to empower the God of Death to get to the level and like wake him up, for that like mano y mano of those two gods fighting, a lot of the Eldar have to pretty much commit like mass genocide on themselves. Like they have to basically just, you know, do the thing to themselves to meet their God of the Dead, and then that will empower the god to fight Slaanesh on similar power levels. But obviously a race doesn't want to like go extinct because of a prophecy, so that's why it's controversial. Althinian, he's a Wraith Lord, and he's a friend to Iana. He doesn't play a huge role, but it is kind of like he's a backboard character where Iana is able to just kind of like dialogue at him, and then he responds, and then like it just kind of allows her to expand on her own character. There's Nadaria and Arietian. They're twins. They control a Wraith Knight. A lot of their character is basically based around fate and agency, with one's own choices and how they play like a role in their everyday life. Like it's a lot of this book actually has to do with like fate and their own agency. So like daily the Eldar will just be like, oh, am I actually making my own choices, or is it the skein that's like choosing for me? Like how much of my own life is my own? Arietian's sister does end up dying, as, you know, loving twins usually do, especially in a setting like this. And then the book kind of, at least not the book, but the arc for him ends with him being a new path. So it's not clear exactly what it is. If anybody wants to comment what it is, I'd actually really like to know. As also with just like any other Eldar tidbits, genuinely, not even for engagement, I just really want to know more about how, like, where all this stuff was leading, because I don't know, and I don't know enough about Eldar stuff to like know even where to look to figure out what happened with all these characters. So if anybody knows, please give me a big chonky comment below, and I would love to read it. Duriel Sunspear, he's a significant player in the book. Just like with Althinian, he talks a lot about how fate controls like everything about his life, to the point that he doesn't feel like he has any real choices left in his own life. Then there's Yalianar. He's Prince Uriel's right-hand man, and similar to Althinian with Iana, he's kind of not really that important, but also like Uriel's like talking backboard, like dialogue at, dialogue for, and then you get to know both characters like more and get more insight. There's Lord Sarnak. He's one of the 5 prime archons of the Cabal of the Black Heart. He calls himself the Prime of Primes, and he brings aid from the Dark City of Camorra, as well as the Doomsday weapon known as the Fireheart. And then finally, Lelith Hasperax, Witch of the Cult of Strife, which is the largest cult in Camorra. And yeah, that's pretty much all of like the semi-important / important characters, which, if you can believe it, that's not even all of them. Okay, because there's a bunch of other Farseers I didn't mention, and there's a bunch of other ground soldiers I didn't mention, and there's like 2 other Wraith Knight teams that I didn't mention. So if you can believe it, there's more characters. And that's part of the reason why, if you look at any review for the book, they'll be like, there's too many characters. And I don't disagree. There are a lot. And yeah, if you are going to read it, again, just be aware. Lots of dialogue, pretty slow story, and a premise that kind of doesn't matter, but it's also a really good, well-crafted story. So, I don't know. Like, what do you want, I guess? Anyways, that pretty much does it for me. I am over my time. I usually like to strive for that 30-minute mark, but you know, it is what it is. Maybe I can get it down because of all the ums, uhs, buts, likes, and all the other random nonsense I say between words. The next book is going to be actually on special request. It is going to be The Great Work, and then after that, I think I'm going to do Hammer and Bolter because I want to follow up Faith and Fire. I just feel like The Great Work is more productive because that's like the next book you should read after reading The Silent King, because The Silent King sets up a lot of what The Great Work pretty much covers. So yeah, anyways, thanks for watching. I really, really do appreciate it. I'll do this regardless of anybody actually watching because I just want to talk about like Warhammer stuff, but I do appreciate if you did watch and if you did get all the way through. That is very cool of you. Yeah, see you tomorrow and or next week, depending on when I post. But yeah, see you around.